There are places in this world that exist between legend and stone, where the boundary between the mortal and divine grows thin as mountain air. High Hrothgar is such a place. Perched near the summit of the Throat of the World, the tallest peak in all of Tamriel, this ancient monastery stands as a testament to patience, discipline, and the power of restraint. For thousands of years, the Greybeards have dwelled here in absolute silence, masters of a force so tremendous that even their whispers can shake the foundations of the earth. This is the story of High Hrothgar. A story of dragons and men of war and peace, of voices that could shatter mountains, learning instead to worship the sky. The mountain that touches the sky. Long before the first stone of High Hrothgar was placed, the mountain itself was sacred. The Nords call it the Throat of the World, though it has borne other names across the ages. In the dragon tongue, it is known as Monavan, which translates to Mother Wind. Some texts refer to it simply as Mount Hrothgar, linking the peak itself to the monastery that would one day crown it. But to truly understand High Hrothgar, we must first understand why this mountain, of all the peaks that pierce the frozen sky of Skyrim, became the dwelling place of those who would master the voice. The Throat of the World rises higher than any other mountain on the continent of Tamriel. Its peak scrapes against the very ceiling of the world, where the air grows thin and cold enough to crystallize breath into falling ice. The snow that accumulates at its summit is said to never melt, remaining pristine and untouched by the changing seasons far below. This eternal snow became the subject of legend, prized by alchemists who believed it held properties found nowhere else in creation. One such artifact, the White Phial, was crafted from this snow, a vessel said to be unbreakable and pure. But the mountain's significance extends far beyond its physical majesty. According to Nordic belief, this is the birthplace of mankind itself. The ancient myths tell that when the world was young and dragons ruled over all of Mundus, the goddess Kine looked upon the crawling masses of men with pity. They were weak, voiceless creatures with no means to defend themselves against the tyranny of the dragon priests and their scaled masters. And so Kine, the warrior widow of Shore, the goddess of storm and sky, breathed upon the peak of this mountain. Her divine breath gave life to the first Nords, shaping them from the very stone and ice of the summit. This creation myth is more than mere story to the Nords. It represents a fundamental truth about their identity and their relationship with the land. The Throat of the World is not just where their ancestors were born, but where their very essence originated. Every Nord who draws breath carries within them a fragment of that first exhalation from Kine. Their voice, their breath, is considered their life essence, the manifestation of their soul. This is why the Thu'um, the voice, holds such profound significance in Nordic culture. To speak with power is to channel that original creative force, to echo the breath of the goddess who made them. The Song of Return, one of the oldest Nordic chants, speaks not only of Ysgramor's return to Tamriel after the destruction of Saarthal, but also of a spiritual return to this mountain, to the cradle of humanity. Pilgrims who make the journey up the 7,000 steps describe a feeling of homecoming, as if their souls remember this place from before memory began. They speak of dreams that come to them during the climb, visions of ancient times when the mountain was young and the first voices rang out against stone. The geography of the Throat of the World reflects its sacred nature. The mountain dominates the landscape of central Skyrim, visible from nearly every hold when weather permits. It rises from the eastern edge of Whiterun Hold, though its slopes extend into the rift as well. The peak itself is often shrouded in clouds, hidden from casual view as if the mountain chooses when to reveal itself to the world below. When storms gather, which they often do, lightning seems to be drawn to the summit, crackling across the ancient rocks in displays that can be seen for miles. The path to High Hrothgar, known as the 7,000 Steps, winds around the mountain in a spiraling ascent that tests both body and spirit. The trail begins in the small village of Ivarstead, situated near Lake Gear in the Rift. From there, it climbs through increasingly harsh terrain, passing through zones of pine forest, exposed rock face, and eventually into the realm of perpetual snow and ice. The journey typically takes the better part of a day for those in good physical condition, though many pilgrims take longer, pausing to rest and meditate at the shrines along the way. The dangers of the ascent are legendary. The mountain is home to frost trolls, massive predators whose regenerative abilities and raw strength have ended the pilgrimage of many an unprepared traveler. Ice wraiths drift through the upper reaches, elemental beings formed from the cold itself, while wolves and bears patrol the lower slopes. The weather itself can turn deadly without warning, as blizzards sweep across the exposed sections of the path with winds strong enough to hurl a person from the trail. Yet despite these perils, pilgrims have been making this journey for thousands of years. They come from every hold in Skyrim and beyond, driven by devotion, by curiosity, or simply by the desire to test themselves against the mountain that created their people. Some seek the Greybeards' blessing or wisdom. Others hope merely to stand where their ancestors first stood and breathe the air that Kine herself breathed into the world. The choice of this location for High Hrothgar was no accident. When Jurgen Windcaller sought a place to establish his new philosophy, he understood that the setting itself would communicate the values he wished to instill. The mountain's height represents aspiration toward the divine, the constant upward striving of the soul toward enlightenment. Its isolation ensures that those who dwell there can devote themselves fully to their studies, free from the distractions and temptations of the world below. The harsh conditions serve as a constant reminder of the need for discipline and endurance, and the sacred nature of the peak itself lends legitimacy and spiritual authority to the teachings practiced there. High Hrothgar sits not quite at the summit, but at a point where the air is still breathable for extended periods, yet high enough to require serious commitment to reach. The monastery looks out over all of Skyrim, a vantage point from which one can see the holds spread out below like pieces on a game board. On clear days, the White River can be traced from the mountains of the Reach all the way to Lake Honrick. The lights of Whiterun are visible to the west, while Windhelm marks the northern horizon. This perspective, this God's eye view of the land, reinforces the philosophical detachment that the Greybeards cultivate. They observe the affairs of men from above, intervening only in the rarest of circumstances. The monastery itself was constructed using a combination of Nordic engineering and the natural features of the mountain. Much of the structure is built directly into the rock face, utilizing caves and overhangs that were expanded and shaped by generations of devoted hands. The visible portions are constructed from the same gray stone as the mountain, making the monastery appear as if it grew organically from the peak rather than being built by mortal hands. This integration with the mountain reinforces the philosophy that the Greybeards should be part of the natural order, not separate from or above it. The view from High Hrothgar's courtyard is breathtaking in its scope. To stand there is to feel simultaneously small and elevated, to experience both humility and exaltation. The wind that constantly sweeps across the peak carries with it the voices of the world below, the countless sounds of life and strife blended into a single rushing whisper. The Greybeards say that if one learns to truly listen to this wind, one can hear Kine herself speaking through it, sharing the wisdom of the ages with those patient enough to attend. This is the foundation upon which everything else rests. High Hrothgar is not simply a building or even a monastery. It is a place where the divine and mortal intersect, where heaven touches earth, where the breath of creation still lingers in the frozen air. To understand High Hrothgar, one must first understand this mountain, this sacred peak where mankind was born and where some of them chose to return, seeking not power or glory, but understanding. Before the silence, the age of dragon tongues, but the story of High Hrothgar cannot truly begin without first understanding what came before it, the age that the way of the voice was created to move beyond. In the Merethic era, in the time before recorded history, the world was a very different place, and the voice, the Thu'um, was not a tool of worship or meditation. It was a weapon of war. The dragons had ruled over all of Mundus since the beginning of time. They were the first children of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, embodiments of dominance and power given wings and eternal life. Their very language carried inherent force. When a dragon spoke, reality itself bent to accommodate the truth of its words. To a dragon, there is no distinction between debate and combat. To speak is to assert, and to assert is to dominate. The Thu'um is not merely communication, but an expression of the fundamental will to power that defines dragonkind. In those ancient days, dragons ruled over men through the dragon cult, a religious and political hierarchy that placed the great worms as living gods. Dragon priests, men who had been granted fragments of draconic power and immortality, served as intermediaries between the scaled gods and their human subjects. The Nords of this era were little more than slaves, toiling to build monuments to their draconic overlords, offering tribute and sacrifice to maintain favor with beings who could obliterate entire settlements with a single word. The leader of the dragons was Alduin, the World Eater, firstborn of Akatosh, and the most terrible of all his kind. Alduin claimed for himself the title of Divine Ruler, asserting dominance not only over mortals, but over his dragon siblings as well. His lieutenant and brother was Paarthurnax, a dragon whose very name translates to ambition overlord cruelty. Together they enforced an order where might made right, and the strong ruled the weak without question or mercy. But even in the depths of oppression, the human spirit proved resilient. The ancient Nords chafed under dragon rule, and their resentment grew with each generation. They dreamed of freedom, of casting off the chains that bound them to the dragon cult, but they were powerless to act on these dreams. They had no magic to speak of, no means of flight, only crude weapons of iron and steel. What chance did such tools have against creatures who could burn entire armies to ash with their breath or freeze them solid with a word? The answer came from the most unexpected of sources. Kine, the Nordic goddess of storm and sky, took pity on her mortal children. She called upon Paarthurnax, and despite his nature as a dragon, despite his role as Alduin's right hand, something within him answered. Perhaps it was indeed pity that moved him. Perhaps it was recognition that Alduin's claim to godhood was false, a usurpation of Akatosh's rightful authority. Or perhaps it was simple ambition, a desire to overthrow his elder brother and claim dominance for himself. The truth is lost to time, and possibly even Paarthurnax himself no longer remembers his original motivation. Whatever the reason, Paarthurnax made a choice that would change the course of history. He taught men to speak in the dragon tongue. He showed them how to channel the power of their voice, to infuse their words with the same reality-shaping force that dragons wielded by nature. This was not an easy gift to give or receive. The dragon tongue is not designed for mortal throats. Learning to speak it requires years, even decades of training. A single mispronunciation can tear a student's vocal cords or worse. The power must be internalized, understood not just intellectually, but spiritually. Each word of power represents a fundamental truth of existence, and to speak it with the voice requires aligning one's entire soul with that truth. But some men proved capable. The first were three heroes whose names echo through Nordic legend: Gurmla, Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old. Under Paarthurnax's tutelage, they mastered the Thu'um, becoming the first tongues, the first humans who could speak with the power of dragons. And with this new weapon, they turned the tide of the Dragon War. The rebellion spread like wildfire across Skyrim. As more Nords learned the voice, as more tongues emerged to lead the resistance, the dragons found themselves facing an enemy they could no longer simply dominate. For the first time in their existence, the worms encountered humans who could fight them on their own terms, who could shout them from the sky and bind them with words of power. The war was brutal and costly. Countless humans died. As the tablets on the 7,000 Steps record, their sacrifices were many-fold, but they persevered. The climax of the Dragon War came at the summit of the throat of the world. Alduin himself came to crush the rebellion, bringing with him an army of dragons to scour the peak clean of the insolent mortals who dared challenge draconic rule. The three tongue leaders faced him there, and they were outmatched. Even with the Thu'um, even fighting together, they could not bring down the World Eater. In desperation, they created something unprecedented. They forged a shout not from the dragon language, but from mortal concepts, from uniquely human understanding. They created Dragonrend, a shout that embodied the concept of mortality itself. Dragons are immortal. They do not age, do not sicken, do not die unless slain. The very concept of finite existence is alien to them, incomprehensible and terrible. When the tongues used Dragonrend against Alduin, they forced him to experience mortality, to feel the crushing weight of limited time. It brought him crashing from the sky, his invincibility stripped away by understanding that which he could never truly comprehend. But even then, they could not kill him. In a final desperate act, Feldir the Old used an Elder Scroll, one of the artifacts that exist outside of time itself, to cast Alduin forward through the ages, the Boo. World Eater vanished from history, banished to an unknown future. With Alduin gone, the remaining dragons were hunted down and slaughtered. Some fled to remote places, hiding from human vengeance. Others fought to the last, refusing to submit to creatures they saw as beneath them. By the end, only a handful of dragons remained alive in all of Tamriel, and those that survived did so by going into deep hiding. The dragon cult collapsed. The dragon priests, deprived of their masters, were sealed in their tombs, where they would slumber for thousands of years. Humanity was free, and the tongues, the masters of the voice who had won that freedom, became heroes and legends. They were revered as the greatest of warriors, proof that with sufficient will and training, humans could stand equal even to gods. The Thu'um had proven itself as the ultimate weapon, capable of breaking sieges, destroying armies, and toppling empires. This set the stage for what came next. In the First Era, as the Nords built their civilization upon the ruins of the dragon cult, the tongues became not just heroes, but warlords. Under High King Vreg the Gifted, Skyrim embarked on a campaign of conquest that would see Nordic armies push into High Rock, deep into Morrowind, and even into northern Cyrodiil. The tongues led these armies, and they needed no siege engines or conventional weapons. When they came to a city's walls, they simply shouted the gates to rubble. Derek the Tall, Jorg Helmbolg, Hogmer Keeler, these names and others like them became synonymous with Nordic expansion and dominance. The Thu'um had become a tool of conquest, a weapon to spread Nordic power across Tamriel. Cities that stood for centuries fell in hours when tongues directed their voices against stone and mortar. Armies that outnumbered the Nordic forces 10-1 scattered when the voice shook the battlefield. For a time, it seemed that Skyrim might conquer all of Tamriel through the raw power of the Thu'um alone. But this age of expansion contained the seeds of its own ending. The Nords overextended, pushing too far too fast into lands they could not hold. Internal disputes arose over succession and the distribution of conquered territory. And most critically, the Thu'um itself began to fail them in ways they did not anticipate. The power that had served them so well against dragons and in early battles proved less decisive in prolonged campaigns against organized resistance. Magic, which the Nords largely disdained, could counter the voice. Tactics and terrain could negate its advantages. And the training of new tongues took so long that losses could not easily be replaced. The great test came at Red Mountain in Morrowind during a conflict between the Nords and the Dwemer-Chimer alliance. The Nordic army, led by their tongues, marched into Morrowind confident in their ability to shout down any opposition. Instead, they met with catastrophic defeat. The Dwemer's technological prowess and the Chimers' potent magic proved more than a match for Nordic shouting. The army was annihilated. Among the survivors was a tongue named Jurgen Windcaller, and the destruction of his forces would haunt him for the rest of his life. This was the world before High Hrothgar, an age of power used without restraint, of the voice wielded as a hammer to break nations. An era where the greatest masters of the Thu'um led armies rather than living in contemplation, where shouting was synonymous with conquest rather than worship. To appreciate the revolution that Jurgen Windcaller would bring about, we must understand how radically he departed from everything that had come before. The Greybeards and their philosophy represent a complete inversion of values from the tongue warriors who preceded them. And that transformation began with one man's meditation on failure. Jurgen Windcaller and the 7-year meditation. The man who would change everything stood amid the ruins of his army, looking out over a battlefield choked with Nordic dead. Jurgen Windcaller had been one of the most powerful tongues of his generation, a warrior whose voice could flatten forests and crack mountains. He had led his soldiers into Morrowind with absolute confidence, secure in the knowledge that the Thu'um made Nordic victory inevitable. And now he watched as the few survivors limped away from Red Mountain, the Chimer and Dwemer having demonstrated conclusively that voice alone was not enough to guarantee success. The Battle of Red Mountain, fought sometime in the early First Era between 416 and 700, depending on which historical accounts one credits, represented more than just a military defeat for the Nords. It was a spiritual crisis. For generations, the tongues had been told and had believed that the Thu'um was a gift from Keen, proof of divine favor, a power that made Nords superior to all other races. If that were true, how could they have been so thoroughly beaten? Had the gods abandoned them? Had they somehow lost that divine blessing? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with how they understood and used the voice? Jurgen Windcaller could have reacted to this defeat in many ways. He could have raged against the gods for their betrayal. He could have doubled down, arguing that they simply needed more tongues, stronger training, better tactics. He could have abandoned the voice entirely, turning to other forms of power in his bitterness. Instead, he did something that was, in the context of his culture and time, truly radical. He chose to think about it. Withdrawing from the world, Jurgen climbed to the highest reaches of the throat of the world. He found a place near the summit where the air was thin and the wind never ceased, where he could see all of Skyrim spread out beneath him, but where no one could reach him easily. And there, in that isolated place, he sat down and began to meditate. For 7 years, Jurgen Windcaller contemplated a single question: how can strong voices fail? This question appears on one of the etched tablets along the 7,000 steps, commemorating this period of his life. 7 years of solitary meditation, wrestling with a problem that had implications far beyond military tactics. If the voice was what the Nords believed it to be, if it was Kind's gift and a sign of her favor, then its failure had to mean something. It had to reveal some truth that they had been missing. We can only imagine what those 7 years were like. The mountain is not kind to those who dwell upon its heights. Winter storms that would kill an ordinary person in hours are a regular occurrence. Food would have been scarce, the cold relentless. Yet Jurgen endured, sustained by something beyond mere physical determination. In later years, his followers would say that he learned to draw sustenance from the mountain itself, from the air and stone that kine had breathed into life. Whether this is literal truth or metaphor, it speaks to the transformation he underwent during those years of isolation. The meditation was not passive. Jurgen practiced the voice constantly during this time, but in new ways. Instead of using it to destroy or dominate, he began to experiment with other applications. He shouted at the wind and listened to how it responded. He directed his voice at stone not to break it, but to understand it, to feel how the Thu'um resonated through solid matter. He spoke to the sky, to the snow, to the silence itself, and slowly, gradually, understanding began to dawn. The revelation, when it finally came, was both simple and profound. The Nords had been misusing the voice. The Thu'um was never meant to be a weapon of conquest. It was not a tool for building empires or subjugating other peoples. The voice was the breath of kine, the first gift she had given to mankind, and like breath itself, it was meant to sustain life, not end it. When the ancient Nords had learned the Thu'um from Paarthurnax, they had used it to overthrow tyranny, to free themselves from enslavement. That was a worthy cause, a true need. But using the voice for wars of expansion, for conquest and glory, for the accumulation of power and territory, this was a perversion of its sacred purpose. Jurgen came to believe that the gods had not abandoned the Nords at Red Mountain. Rather, they had been punished for their arrogance. They had taken a divine gift and used it for mortal ambitions. They had treated the voice as if it belonged to them, as if they had earned it through their own merit, when in truth it was a blessing that could be withdrawn. The defeat was not a failure of the Thu'um itself, but a failure of those who wielded it. They had forgotten that the voice was meant for worship, for the glory of the gods, not the glory of men. This understanding led Jurgen to formulate what would become known as the Way of the Voice. The core principle was simple but revolutionary. The Thu'um should only be used in times of true need. Not every need, not every desire or ambition, but true need with capitals, the kind of existential necessity that justified the use of such tremendous power. The defense of one's people from annihilation would qualify. The overthrow of tyranny and slavery would qualify. But conquest, expansion, even most forms of self-defense, these did not rise to the level of true need. Further, Jurgen taught that the real purpose of the voice was not as a weapon, but as a form of worship. Every word spoken in the dragon tongue should be an offering to the gods, particularly to kine, who had given this gift. The Thu'um was a means of achieving spiritual enlightenment, of attuning oneself to the voice of the sky, of reaching toward the divine. Its power should be cultivated not for external use, but for internal transformation. A master of the voice was not one who could destroy the most or conquer the most, but one who had achieved harmony between their inner spirit and their outward actions, between their mortal nature and the divine breath that sustained them. This philosophy required a lifestyle of meditation and contemplation. One could not achieve true mastery of the voice while embroiled in the petty concerns of politics and warfare. To study the way required isolation, silence, and constant introspection. The tongues of old had been warriors and kings. Jurgen envisioned a new kind of tongue, one who would live apart from the world, who would speak only in the rarest of circumstances, who would measure their words with the same care that others measured gold. When Jurgen finally descended from his meditation after 7 years, he was transformed. Those who had known him before said he moved differently, spoke differently. that there was a calm about him that had not been there before. He had been a great warrior. Now he was something else, something that the Nordic language did not quite have a word for yet. He became known as Jurgen the Calm, a title that carried both respect and a hint of disappointment from those who valued martial prowess above spiritual development. But Jurgen was not content to simply practice his new philosophy alone. He understood that for the way of the voice to truly take root, it would need to spread, to be accepted and adopted by other tongues. And so he began to teach, to share what he had learned during his 7 years of isolation. Many were skeptical. The use of the Thu'um in warfare was so deeply ingrained in Nordic culture that suggesting it should be abandoned seemed like madness. Tongues were respected precisely because they could break armies and topple walls. What use was a tongue who chose not to use their power? 17 of the greatest tongues of the age challenged Jurgen to prove his philosophy. If the way of the voice was truly superior, they argued, then let him demonstrate it in the traditional way, through combat. They would face him one by one or all at once, whatever he preferred, and whoever's voice proved stronger would be vindicated. It was a test that seemed designed to discredit Jurgen's teachings. 17 against 1, and they were all masters of the destructive applications of the Thu'um. Even if Jurgen was more powerful than any individual tongue, how could he stand against so many? The confrontation that followed would become legend. According to the histories, Jurgen did not attack his challengers. Instead, he simply stood before them and absorbed their shouts. For 3 days, the 17 tongues hurled every word of power they knew at him. They shouted fire and frost, force and fear. They used shouts that could rend flesh and shouts that could break stone. And Jurgen Windcaller swallowed them all. He did not counter, did not retaliate, did not even raise his voice in response. He simply endured. By the end of the 3rd day, the 17 challengers were exhausted. They had poured out all their power, spent every reserve of strength, and still Jurgen stood before them, calm and unharmed. They realized then that they had been wrong. True mastery of the voice was not about destruction, but control. It was not about projecting power outward, but channeling it inward. Jurgen had not defeated them through superior force, but through superior understanding. His voice was stronger precisely because he had learned when not to use it. The 17 tongues became Jurgen's first disciples. They swore to follow the way of the voice, to dedicate their lives to meditation and worship rather than warfare. And together, they chose a place to establish this new order, to create a monastery where they could practice these principles away from the temptations and distractions of the world below. They chose the site where Jurgen had undergone his 7-year meditation high upon the throat of the world, and there they began to build what would become High Hrothgar. Jurgen Windcaller's transformation from warrior to philosopher, from conqueror to contemplative, set the template for all who would follow. The Greybeards would be defined by restraint rather than display, by silence rather than proclamation, by the power they chose not to use rather than the power they wielded. This was the foundation upon which High Hrothgar would be built, not just the physical structure, but the philosophical and spiritual tradition that would endure for thousands of years. The founding of High Hrothgar. The construction of High Hrothgar was as much a spiritual endeavor as a physical one. Jurgen Windcaller and his 17 disciples did not simply want to build a monastery. They wanted to create a living embodiment of the way of the voice, a structure that would teach its lessons through its very existence. Every stone placed, every room carved, every corridor shaped was done with intention and meaning. The location itself was the first lesson. By building so high upon the mountain, at a point where the air grew thin and the cold never truly relented, they ensured that only those with serious dedication would make the journey to reach them. This was not meant as a barrier to keep people out, but as a filter to ensure that those who arrived did so with proper motivation. The climb up the 7,000 steps was intended to be part of the teaching, a physical meditation that prepared the spirit for what waited above. The construction began with the most basic of tools and techniques. There were no shouts to speed the work, no use of the Thu'um to move massive stones or carve intricate patterns. To do so would have violated the very principles they were establishing. The voice was not a tool of convenience or construction. So they worked as ordinary men would work, with hammer and chisel, with rope and lever. The slowness of the work became a meditation in itself, teaching patience and humility. They utilized the natural features of the mountain wherever possible. The peak was riddled with caves and crevices, spaces that had been formed over countless millennia by wind and ice and the slow shifting of stone. These natural chambers were expanded and connected, creating a network of interior spaces that felt less like they had been imposed upon the mountain and more like they had been discovered within it. The monastery grew organically, following the contours of the rock, adapting to the environment rather than trying to dominate it. The visible exterior structure rose from gray stone that was quarried from the mountain itself. Each block was cut to fit precisely with its neighbors, creating walls that could withstand the brutal winds that constantly swept across the peak. The architecture was deliberately simple, austere even. There was no ornamentation, no decorative carving, no attempt at beauty for beauty's sake. The building was functional, solid, built to endure. This aesthetic of simplicity reflected the philosophy within. Just as the building stripped away all unnecessary decoration, so too did the way of the voice strip away all unnecessary speech and action. The main structure consists of several key areas, each serving a specific function in the life and training of the Greybeards. The entrance hall welcomes visitors with a long, echoing corridor that leads deeper into the mountain. The walls here are bare stone, lit by scattered torches that cast dancing shadows. The sound of footsteps echoes for what seems like forever, a reminder of the silence that otherwise pervades this place. This is where the Greybeards first meet those who have completed the climb, and where they make their initial assessments of a visitor's character and purpose. Beyond the entrance lies the Great Hall, a large open chamber with a high ceiling. This is where the Greybeards gather for their communal activities. Though given their vow of silence, these gatherings are often remarkably quiet. The hall serves as a dining area, a meeting place, and occasionally as a space for practicing shouts in a controlled environment. Banners hang from the ceiling and walls bearing words, "In the Dragon Tongue." These banners serve as constant reminders of the philosophy they practice. Two phrases appear repeatedly on these banners throughout High Hrothgar, Lochbo, Sky, and Thu'um, which can be loosely translated as shout, shout. These simple words carry deep meaning for those who have devoted their lives to studying the voice. The sleeping quarters are small individual cells carved into the rock. Each Greybeard has his own room, barely large enough for a bed, and perhaps a small table or chest. There is no luxury here, no comfort beyond what is absolutely necessary. The austerity is intentional, meant to remind the inhabitants that they have renounced worldly concerns. Sleep is necessary for the body, but it is not something to be indulged in. The Greybeards rest when they must, and wake when they should, governed by the needs of their meditation and training rather than by any arbitrary schedule. Perhaps the most important area of High Hrothgar is the courtyard, an open space accessible from the rear of the main building. This is where much of the actual training takes place. Here, away from the enclosed halls, Greybeards practice their shouts under the open sky. The courtyard is large enough for several people to train simultaneously without interfering with each other, and it is situated so that the wind carries the sounds away from the mountain rather than back toward it, preventing accidental avalanches or other unintended consequences of vocal practice. The courtyard also serves as the gateway to the final ascent to the throat of the world summit. A path leads from here, winding further up the mountain through terrain even more treacherous than what lies below. This path is not meant for casual pilgrims or visitors. It is reserved for those moments of true need when the Greybeards must seek counsel with Paarthurnax, the dragon who serves as their grandmaster and who dwells in isolation at the very peak. Within the monastery, there are also rooms devoted to the preservation of knowledge. Though the Greybeards live simply and speak rarely, they are not ignorant of the world or of history. They maintain a library of sorts, though it is small by the standards of places like the Arcane University or the College of Winterhold. The texts here focus primarily on the Thu'um itself, on the dragon language and its meanings, on the history of the voice, and those who have wielded it. There are also records of visions and meditations, insights gained during long periods of contemplation that are deemed worthy of preservation. The architecture of High Hrothgar reflects a deep understanding of acoustics. The halls and chambers are shaped in such a way that sound behaves peculiarly within them. Whispers can carry for unexpected distances, while shouts can be contained and directed. This is partly intentional design and partly a consequence of the mountain's natural properties. The Greybeards have learned to use these acoustic properties in their training, understanding that the Thu'um is as much about listening as about speaking. There are also practical considerations built into the monastery's design. The harsh climate requires that the building be well insulated and able to retain heat. Fireplaces and hearths are placed strategically throughout, though they are used sparingly. The Greybeards have grown accustomed to the cold, viewing it as another form of meditation, another teacher of patience and endurance. Storage areas hold food supplies brought up by the people of Iberstead, payment in kind for blessings and occasional teachings that the Greybeards provide to the world below. The founding of High Hrothgar represented a profound shift in Nordic culture. For the first time, the most powerful masters of the voice were choosing to remove themselves from positions of worldly power and influence. Tongues had been kings, warlords, champions who shaped the political and military landscape. Now the greatest among them were becoming monks, choosing isolation and contemplation over action and conquest. This was not a popular decision with many Nords. The martial culture of Skyrim valued strength, valor, and visible displays of power. The idea that the strongest tongues would hide themselves away on a mountaintop, refusing to use their abilities to benefit their people, struck many as cowardly or even treasonous. Why should Skyrim's greatest warriors remove themselves from service? Who would protect the holds if more enemies like those at Red Mountain appeared? Jurgen Windcaller anticipated these objections and had his response ready. The Greybeards were not abandoning their people. Rather, they were ensuring that the voice would never again be misused as it had been. They would preserve the Thu'um in its purest form, maintaining the sacred traditions and preventing the kind of hubris that had led to the disaster at Red Mountain. And in times of true need, they would act. But they, not ambitious jarls or power-hungry kings, would determine when such a time had come. Moreover, the Greybeards would serve as teachers for those rare individuals who showed the aptitude and character to learn the way of the voice. Not everyone could master the Thu'um, of course. It required both natural talent and years of dedicated training. But for those who possessed the gift, High Hrothgar would be open to them, a place where they could learn from the masters. This teaching function was limited by the Greybeards' philosophy. They would not train warriors to use the voice in warfare, but they would teach those who sought enlightenment rather than power. The establishment of High Hrothgar also had political implications. By declaring their monastery to be neutral ground, the Greybeards created a place that stood outside the normal power structures of Skyrim. No jarl could claim authority over them. No king could command them. They answered only to the gods and to their own understanding of true need. This made High Hrothgar a unique institution in Nordic society, a source of spiritual authority that was separate from and in some ways superior to a temporal power. Over time, this neutrality would become absolute. During the Fourth Era's civil war between the Stormcloaks and the Empire, both sides respected High Hrothgar's neutrality. When the last Dragonborn brought leaders from both factions to the monastery to negotiate a peace treaty, neither Ulfric Stormcloak nor General Tullius questioned the choice of venue. High Hrothgar was understood to be a place apart, where normal rules of conflict did not apply. The founding of High Hrothgar marked the beginning of a tradition that would endure for over 4,000 years. Through the rise and fall of dynasties, through invasions and civil wars, through ages of prosperity and eras of darkness, the Greybeards would remain at their post high upon the throat of the world. The monastery would stand as a testament to the power of restraint, to the wisdom of knowing when not to act, to the profound strength that comes from silence. The 7,000 Steps, a pilgrim's journey. The journey to High Hrothgar begins in the small village of Ivarstead, nestled at the base of the throat of the world's western slope. For those who come seeking the Greybeards, the village represents the last outpost of ordinary life before entering a realm of spiritual trial and transformation. The path ahead, known as the 7,000 Steps, is more than just a physical route up a mountain. It is a pilgrimage, a meditation made manifest in stone and ice, a journey that strips away pretense and reveals the truth of who you are. Ivarstead itself has a strange relationship with the mountain that looms above it. The village survives partly through fishing in the nearby lake and farming what crops will grow in the harsh climate, but its true livelihood comes from serving those who wish to climb the steps. Merchants sell supplies to pilgrims, warm clothing, preserved food, healing potions, blessed amulets that are supposed to provide protection against the mountain's dangers. The local inn provides a last comfortable bed before the ascent, and a first one after the descent. Some of the villagers, like a man named Klimek, make regular trips up the mountain carrying supplies to High Hrothgar, a duty that earns him respect from his neighbors even as it taxes his aging body. The beginning of the 7,000 Steps is marked by a bridge crossing to the northwest side of the village. Once across this bridge, there is a clear moment of transition. The ordinary world falls away, and the path begins to climb. The steps themselves vary in condition and construction. Some are clearly carved, wide, and stable. Others are little more than worn paths across bare rock. Many are covered in snow and ice, their edges obscured, requiring careful navigation to avoid a potentially fatal fall. The name 7,000 Steps is somewhat misleading. Various pilgrims and curious scholars who have bothered to count report somewhere between 700 and 800 actual steps visible on the path. Some suggest that the name is metaphorical rather than literal, that it represents the thousands of individual decisions, actions, and moments of will required to complete the journey. Others point out that much of the path is worn away by centuries of wind and weather, that perhaps there truly were 7,000 distinct steps when the path was first laid out. And still others calculate that if one counts every footstep required to make the ascent, the number approaches 7,000. Whatever the truth, the name has stuck, and it carries a weight of tradition and expectation. The first portion of the climb passes through zones of pine forest. The air here is still relatively warm, and the trees provide some shelter from wind. This section, while physically demanding, offers a certain comfort. The familiar smells of pine sap and earth, the sounds of birds and small animals, these are reassuring reminders that the world of life and growth is still close. But as the climb continues, the forest gradually gives way to bare rock, and the temperature begins to drop noticeably. Along the path, at 10 different locations, pilgrims encounter stone shrines. These are simple structures, each containing an etched tablet bearing a verse in both the dragon tongue and translated into Nordic. These tablets tell the story of the voice itself, from the ancient days when dragons ruled, through mankind's gift of the Thu'um, to the founding of the Greybeards order. They are numbered as emblems from 1 through 10, and they serve multiple purposes. First, they provide natural rest points along the climb. The shrines offer a moment to catch one's breath, to drink water, to let burning muscles recover before continuing. Second, they offer spiritual instruction, telling the seeker what they need to understand about the voice before they arrive at High Hrothgar. And third, they serve as a test of attention and commitment. Those who read all 10 tablets in their proper sequence receive a blessing known as the Voice of the Sky, a mystical effect that causes animals to become peaceful in the pilgrim's presence for a full day. This blessing is both reward and reminder, showing that harmony with nature comes from understanding and respect, not domination. The first emblem speaks of the time before humanity, when dragons ruled all of Mundus. It reminds pilgrims that the voice was first the language of dragons, used by them to shape reality according to their will. The dragons spoke only for true needs, the tablet claims, for their words carried such power that they could blot out the sky and flood the land. This sets the stage for everything that follows, establishing the awesome power of the Thu'um and the weight of responsibility that comes with wielding it. The second emblem describes humanity's origins, spread across the face of Mundus, but weak and voiceless. Dragons presided over them as shepherds might preside over sheep, with benevolent contempt at best and cruel dominance at worst. Men had no means of resisting draconic power, no way to assert their will against creatures who could unmake them with a word. This emblem speaks to the fundamental unfairness of the ancient world, where power was distributed unequally by the simple fact of birth. The third emblem tells of the first human resistance, how the fledgling spirits of men grew strong enough to challenge their draconic overlords. But this early defiance ended poorly. The dragons simply shouted them down, breaking their hearts and their will with demonstrations of overwhelming power. This emblem serves as a warning against hubris, a reminder that courage without capability is merely another form of suicide. The fourth emblem is perhaps the most important, for it tells of humanity's salvation. Cain called on Paarthurnax, and the dragon took pity on mankind. Together, they taught humans to use the voice, to speak in the dragon tongue, and thus to fight on equal terms. This marks the turning point when the dragon war began in earnest, dragon against tongue. The tablet makes clear that this was not humanity's achievement alone, but a gift, grace extended from the divine through an unlikely ally. The implication is that the voice must be used with humility, in recognition of its origins. The fifth emblem celebrates mankind's triumph. Through terrible sacrifice, through losses that can scarcely be imagined, men prevailed. They shouted Alduin out of the world, proving that their voice was as strong as that of the dragons who had tormented them. This emblem swells with pride and grief intermingled, honoring those who died to secure freedom for those who would come after. It makes clear that the Thu'um was earned through blood and that its use should honor that sacrifice. The sixth emblem shifts to the aftermath of victory. With the dragons gone, men built their own kingdoms and empires. They ruled justly, the tablet claims, though anyone familiar with history knows this is somewhat idealized. The key point is that freedom from dragon tyranny allowed humanity to flourish, to create civilization on their own terms. The voice had served its purpose, and now men could focus on other pursuits. The seventh emblem introduces the problem that would lead to Jurgen Windcaller's revelation. The tongues, drunk on their power and prestige, went to Red Mountain as conquerors. They were humbled there defeated despite their mastery of the voice. This emblem does not glorify this moment, but presents it factually as a necessary lesson. Jürgen Windcaller began his 7-year meditation, seeking to understand how strong voices could fail. The tablet makes clear that this was not a moment of weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. The 8th emblem describes Jürgen's transformation and return. He chose silence and found strength in it, the 7th T. Disputants who challenged him could not shout him down, for he had learned something they had not. Jürgen the Calm built his home on the throat of the world, establishing High Hrothgar as a place for the new way he had discovered. This emblem marks the transition from the old understanding of the voice to the new. The 9th emblem leaps forward in time to the most dramatic moment in the Greybeards' history. For years they had remained silent, speaking only amongst themselves. Then they spoke one name, Tiber Septim. A stripling youth was summoned to Hrothgar, where the Greybeards blessed him and named him Dovahkiin, Dragonborn. This recognition would set in motion events that would lead to the unification of Tamriel under the Third Empire. The emblem makes clear that the Greybeards do act, do intervene in the world's affairs, but only when the need is truly great and the individual truly worthy. The 10th and final emblem is the most philosophical. The voice is worship, it declares. One should follow the inner path and speak only in true need. This final message distills the entire philosophy of the way of the voice into its most concentrated form. It is both instruction and challenge, asking pilgrims to examine their own motivations for making this journey. Do they seek power, glory, or do they seek understanding and enlightenment? The answer to that question will determine what they find when they reach the monastery above. Between these shrines, the path grows progressively more dangerous. Frost trolls, massive creatures with incredible regenerative abilities and terrible strength, are known to inhabit certain sections. Most pilgrims encounter at least one, and those who are not prepared for combat often die there. The trolls seem to view the path as their hunting ground, and they are patient enough to wait in ambush. Ice wraiths, beings of elemental cold that drift through the air like malevolent ghosts, attack without warning. Wolves hunt in packs along the lower sections. Bears occasionally cross the path, and while they are usually more interested in avoiding humans than attacking them, a startled or hungry bear is nearly as dangerous as a troll. The weather itself becomes an enemy as altitude increases. Blizzards sweep across exposed sections with shocking suddenness, reducing visibility to almost nothing and dropping temperatures to levels that can kill through exposure in minutes. Wind strong enough to knock a person from their feet howls across ridge lines. The path becomes icy, treacherous, requiring careful footwork and sometimes crude climbing techniques to proceed safely. Yet despite these dangers, the climb is also beautiful. The views become more spectacular with every 100 feet of elevation gained. On clear days, one can see for dozens of miles in every direction, watching the sun reflect off Lake Honrik, seeing the smoke rise from Riften's chimneys, observing the movements of clouds far below your feet. There is something profound about standing above the weather, looking down on storms that rage beneath you while you stand in calm air and bright sunlight. Pilgrims report strange experiences during the climb. Some hear voices on the wind, words in languages they do not know. Others experience vivid dreams if they rest along the path, visions of ancient times when the mountain was young. Time seems to behave oddly, the journey taking either far longer or far shorter than it should. These phenomena might be attributed to altitude sickness, exhaustion, or simple imagination. Or they might be something more, the mountain itself teaching lessons to those who have ears to hear. Eventually, after hours or days depending on the pilgrim's pace and condition, the path makes its final turns and High Hrothgar comes into view. The monastery rises from the mountain like a natural formation, gray stone merging with gray rock, barely distinguishable from its surroundings until you are almost upon it. There is no fanfare, no dramatic revelation. The journey simply ends at a set of doors carved into the mountainside, with a courtyard and a few supply chests visible nearby. This is where the Greybeards wait. This is where pilgrims discover whether their journey was worth the cost. And this is where the true teaching begins, for the 7,000 steps, as challenging as they are, merely prepare the body. The work of preparing the spirit happens within those stone walls, in the presence of masters who have spent lifetimes learning to speak without speaking, to shout without sound, to wield power through restraint. The way of the voice, philosophy and practice. To understand the Greybeards, one must first understand the way of the voice, the philosophy that governs every aspect of their existence. It is a deceptively simple teaching that contains profound depths, a practice that is simultaneously ancient and revolutionary, conservative and radical. At its heart lies a single question that Jürgen Windcaller spent 7 years answering: what is the true purpose of the Thu'um? The way teaches that the voice is fundamentally an act of worship. When the goddess Kine breathed life into the first Nords atop the throat of the world, she gave them voice along with breath. These two things are inseparable in Nordic understanding. To speak is to express one's essence, to project one's soul into the world through the medium of air shaped by throat and tongue. The Thu'um takes this further, infusing speech with power drawn from that original divine breath, channeling the force that created mankind itself. If the voice originates from the divine, then its proper use must honor that origin. To speak with the Thu'um should be an act of devotion, a prayer made manifest through words of power. Every shout should glorify the gods, particularly Kine, and acknowledge humanity's dependence on divine grace. Using the voice for selfish purposes, for personal gain or glory, for conquest or domination, this is profoundly sacrilegious. It takes a gift meant to connect humans with the divine and debases it into just another tool of mortal ambition. The concept of true need stands at the center of Greybeard philosophy. Not every need, however urgent it might seem in the moment, rises to the level that would justify use of the Thu'um. A true need must meet several criteria. It must involve existential threats to innocent life or fundamental justice. It must be something that cannot be addressed through lesser means. And it must serve the greater good rather than personal interest. The defense of Skyrim from an invasion by Alduin the World Eater clearly qualifies. A dispute between Jarls over territory does not. This creates an incredibly high bar for action. In the 4,000 years since Jürgen Windcaller founded the Order, the Greybeards have openly intervened in worldly affairs only a handful of times. The most famous instance was their recognition of Tiber Septim as Dragonborn, an act that set in motion the unification of Tamriel. Another was their summoning of the last Dragonborn during the Dragon Crisis of the Fourth Era. These occasions are separated by centuries or millennia of silence, of watching events unfold without taking direct action, no matter how much suffering might be prevented by intervention. This restraint frustrates many who encounter the Greybeards. Why should those with such tremendous power refuse to use it? When enemies threaten Skyrim, when injustice flourishes, when innocents suffer, the Greybeards remain in their mountain fastness, speaking only to each other and offering at most cryptic advice to those who climb the 7,000 steps seeking guidance. To outsiders, this can appear as cowardice, callousness, or a dereliction of responsibility. The Greybeards would respond that this critique misunderstands both power and responsibility. True strength lies not in the ability to act, but in the wisdom to know when action is appropriate. Anyone can use force. The difficult task, the task that requires real mastery, is choosing not to use force even when you could. Every time the Greybeards refrain from intervening, they are exercising their power, just not in a way that produces visible results. They are maintaining the integrity of the voice itself, preventing it from becoming diluted through overuse or corrupted through misapplication. Moreover, they argue, the Greybeards are not as disconnected from the world as critics suggest. They monitor events, discuss developments among themselves, and offer guidance when sought. Their very existence serves a purpose, standing as a reminder that there are powers that transcend politics, forces that cannot be bought or commanded, standards that do not shift with changing circumstances. In a world where strength typically determines right, the Greybeards embody the possibility that wisdom might matter more than power. The daily life of a Greybeard revolves around meditation and practice. They wake before dawn, beginning each day with silent contemplation as they watch the sun rise over Skyrim. This morning, meditation serves multiple purposes. It centers the mind, preparing it for the rigors of Thu'um practice. It provides perspective, reminding the practitioner of their place in the vast sweep of time and space. And it offers opportunity for connection with the divine, for sensing Kind's presence in the wind that constantly sweeps across the peak. After morning meditation comes practice of the voice itself. This is not the casual experimentation of students, but the refined work of masters constantly honing their understanding. The Greybeards practice in the courtyard, where they can shout into open air without causing structural damage. They work on pronunciation, ensuring that every syllable of every word of power is articulated with perfect clarity. They experiment with tonal variations, discovering how slight changes in pitch or rhythm can alter a shout's effects. They practice maintaining control while channeling immense power, learning to speak with precision even when tremendous force flows through their voice. This practice requires that most Greybeards maintain silence in their daily lives. Speaking casually would dull their control, would make it too easy to accidentally unleash destructive power. They have trained themselves so thoroughly, internalized the Thu'um so completely, that even their normal speech carries echoes of that power. When a fully trained Greybeard speaks without care, their voice can crack stone or shatter glass. So they choose not to speak at all, communicating through gestures and facial expressions when absolutely necessary, but mostly existing in comfortable silence. Arngir is the exception. As the most powerful of the human Greybeards in the Fourth Era, he alone has achieved sufficient mastery that he can modulate his voice perfectly, speaking normally without any risk of causing destruction. This makes him the Order's spokesman, the one who interacts with pilgrims and visitors. The other Greybeards, Wulfgar, Einarth, and Bori, have such power in their voices that casual conversation would be dangerous. When they greet the Dragonborn after completion of the trials, their whispered word, Dovahkiin, shakes the monastery and causes avalanches to rumble down the mountain's slopes. If they spoke at full volume, the destruction would be catastrophic. Meals at High Hrothgar are simple, eaten in silence. The food itself is basic, donations from the people of Ivarstead supplemented by what little can be grown or gathered at this altitude. Bread, cheese, dried meat, vegetables that survive in root cellars. There is no feast, no celebration of plenty. The body is maintained as necessary, but not indulged. This austerity extends to all aspects of Greybeard life. Their clothing is simple gray robes, functional and warm, but without decoration. Their living quarters are bare cells. They own almost nothing, personally existing in a state of deliberate poverty that frees them from attachment to material concerns. The afternoon often involves study. Though the Greybeards maintain silence, they are not unlettered. They study ancient texts in the dragon language, working to deepen their understanding of the words of power. They meditate on philosophical texts, exploring questions of ethics, meaning, and the nature of divinity. Some practice calligraphy, reproducing important passages as a form of meditation. The physical act of carefully forming each character becomes a way of internalizing the meaning of the words being copied. Evening brings another session of communal meditation. The Greybeards gather in the Great Hall or the courtyard, sitting in silence as the sun sets and darkness claims the world below. This is a time for introspection, for examining one's thoughts and motivations, for catching any trace of pride or ambition that might have crept in during the day. The Greybeards understand that their greatest enemy is not external, but internal, the constant temptation to use their power, to assert themselves, to believe that their mastery makes them somehow superior to others. Teaching, when it occurs, is an important responsibility, but one approached with great caution. The Greybeards do not actively seek students. They do not advertise or recruit. Those who wish to learn the way of the voice must come to them, must make the pilgrimage up the 7,000 steps, must demonstrate through action rather than words that they are serious about this path. And even then, the Greybeards will test them, will assess whether they have the character to learn the Thu'um without being corrupted by it. The teaching itself is slow, deliberate, focused as much on philosophical understanding as on technical mastery. A student might spend months learning to properly pronounce a single syllable, not because the pronunciation is particularly difficult, but because the teacher wants to ensure the student understands what that syllable means, what truth it represents. The Greybeards know from long experience that power without understanding is dangerous, that someone who learns shouts as mere techniques, as tools to be deployed, will inevitably misuse them. This philosophical foundation is why the Greybeards clash so profoundly with the Blades. The Blades were and are warriors who have traditionally served Dragonborn emperors. They view the Thu'um as a weapon, a powerful technique that Dragonborn should master and use to defend the Empire. The idea that the voice should be restricted, that there are times when it should not be used, even if using it would achieve desired outcomes, strikes the Blades as fundamentally wrong-headed. To them, power exists to be used, and refusing to use available power is a failure of duty. The Greybeards counter that the Blades understand neither the Thu'um nor duty. The voice is not a weapon that can be picked up and put down at will. It is a fundamental expression of one's soul, and using it for violence, even justified violence, leaves marks on that soul. The ancient tongues who used the voice constantly in warfare became something less than fully human, their capacity for compassion and mercy eroded by years of channeling destructive power. The way of the voice preserves not just the Thu'um itself, but the humanity of those who wield it. This fundamental philosophical difference creates tension whenever Dragonborn appear. Dragonborn have an innate gift for the voice, able to absorb understanding of shouts from the souls of slain dragons. They do not require decades of training to master techniques that would take ordinary students a lifetime to learn. This natural ability raises a question. Should Dragonborn follow the way of the voice, or should they use their gift as they see fit? The Greybeards argue that Dragonborn are exceptions to the usual restrictions. Their nature is such that using the Thu'um in combat does not corrupt them the way it would corrupt ordinary mortals. The voice flows through them differently, more naturally, more cleanly. They are meant to be weapons against great evils, and their use of shouts in battle serves the divine purpose for which they were created. However, even Dragonborn should exercise restraint, should use their power judiciously rather than casually, should remember that with great capability comes great responsibility. The practice of the way of the voice, then, is a constant balancing act. It requires tremendous power cultivated through decades of training, combined with the discipline never to use that power except in the rarest of circumstances. It demands perfect mastery of technique paired with absolute humility of spirit. It asks practitioners to be in the world, but not of it, to care about the suffering of others while maintaining the detachment necessary to see the larger patterns that govern existence. For those who successfully walk this path, the rewards are said to be profound. The Greybeards speak of achieving a state of consciousness where the boundaries between self and sky begin to blur, where one's breath becomes indistinguishable from the wind that Kine first breathed into creation. They describe moments of perfect clarity where the nature of reality reveals itself, where all questions dissolve in the face of understanding too deep for words. Whether these are genuine mystical experiences or merely the effects of altitude, isolation, and self-induced trance states, the Greybeards themselves do not question. They know what they have experienced, and that knowledge sustains them through the long years of silence. This is the way of the voice, difficult, demanding, misunderstood by most who hear of it, and yet it endures, practiced by those few who are willing to pay the price of true mastery. The Greybeards through history. The history of the Greybeards is paradoxically both remarkably eventful and almost completely static. For over 4,000 years, they have lived essentially the same way, practicing the same philosophy, occupying the same monastery. Individual Greybeards have come and gone, but the order itself has maintained an unbroken continuity from Jurgen Windcaller's time to the present. This stability is itself remarkable in a world where empires rise and fall in centuries, where cities are built and destroyed and rebuilt, where the map of Tamriel is constantly being redrawn by conquest and treaty. The exact date of High Hrothgar's founding is uncertain. We know it occurred sometime in the First Era, after the Battle of Red Mountain, but before King Wulfharth's first death in 1E 533, since the 5 songs mention the Greybeards as already existing during his lifetime. This places the founding somewhere between 1E 416 and 1E 533, though various scholars argue for dates earlier or later within that range. What matters more than the precise year is that from the moment of its establishment, High Hrothgar became a fixture of Skyrim, as permanent and immovable as the mountain upon which it stands. The early years of the order must have been challenging. Jurgen Windcaller and his 17 disciples were attempting something unprecedented, taking the most powerful warriors in Nordic society and converting them into contemplative monks. The cultural resistance to this transformation cannot be overstated. Nords valued martial prowess, courage in battle, the accumulation of glory through deeds of violence. The idea that true strength came from refusing to fight, that wisdom could be found in silence rather than in bold action, ran counter to everything Nordic culture celebrated. Yet the order persisted. Part of their survival can be attributed to the sheer power of the Greybeards themselves. No one could seriously threaten High Hrothgar while it was defended by masters of the Thu'um. Any army attempting to climb the 7,000 steps would be at severe disadvantage, strung out along a narrow path, exhausted from the climb, vulnerable to shouts that could hurl them from the mountain or bury them in avalanches. The Greybeards' pacifism was predicated on the knowledge that they were effectively invulnerable to external attack. But physical security alone does not explain their endurance. The Greybeards survived because they provided something that Nordic society discovered it needed, a source of spiritual authority independent of temporal power. Kings and jarls came and went, their reigns lasting decades at most. The Greybeards endured for centuries, providing continuity and stability. When political disputes threatened to tear Skyrim apart, both sides could agree to respect the Greybeards' neutrality. High Hrothgar became a place where treaties could be negotiated, where rival factions could meet on neutral ground. The number of Greybeards has fluctuated over time. At its peak, the order may have had several dozen members. During lean periods, it dwindled to less than 10. The Fourth Era represents one such low point, with only 4 human Greybeards remaining: Arngeir, Wulfgar, Bori, and Einarth. This decline is not necessarily a sign of failing relevance. Rather, it reflects the reality that very few people have both the natural talent for the Thu'um and the temperament to embrace the way of the voice. The gift is rare, and the discipline required to follow this path is even rarer. Recruitment to the order has never been formalized. There are no trials or application processes. Instead, individuals with aptitude for the voice find their way to High Hrothgar, driven by circumstances or calling or simple curiosity. The existing Greybeards observe these visitors, assessing not their power, but their character. Do they seek the voice for its own sake, or do they merely want the prestige that comes with being known as a tongue? Are they willing to embrace silence and restraint, or do they view the Thu'um as a tool to advance personal ambitions? These are the questions that matter. One notable failure of the Greybeards' screening occurred with Ulfric Stormcloak. As a young man, Ulfric came to High Hrothgar seeking to learn the way of the voice. He showed natural aptitude for the Thu'um and received training from the Greybeards. For a time, it seemed he might become one of them, dedicating his life to contemplation and the perfection of his craft. But when the Great War came and the Aldmeri Dominion invaded, Ulfric felt he could not remain on the mountain while his people suffered. He left High Hrothgar to fight, using the voice he had learned as a weapon against the Thalmor. The Greybeards understood his choice, even if they disagreed with it. The defense of one's homeland from invasion could potentially qualify as a true need, depending on circumstances. But Ulfric's subsequent use of the voice troubled them deeply. During a duel with the High King of Skyrim, Ulfric used the Thu'um to kill Torrig, shouting him to pieces in a display that was as much about intimidation as about victory. This casual use of the voice for personal political gain, this deployment of sacred power in the service of ambition, represented everything the way of the voice stood against. Ulfric had proven himself unworthy of the training he received, confirming the Greybeards' concerns about teaching the voice to those who had not fully internalized the philosophy behind it. The most famous moment in Greybeard history occurred in the Second Era. After years of complete silence, after watching empires rise and fall without comment, the Greybeards spoke. They uttered a single name, Tiber Septim. The force of this utterance shook the world. Avalanches roared down from the throat of the world. Earthquakes rippled through Skyrim. The sound carried for hundreds of miles, audible from Markarth to Riften, impossible to ignore or misinterpret. The Greybeards were summoning someone, and that someone had better answer. Tiber Septim, at this point, was no one. Special, a young warrior of mixed heritage, ambitious but unremarkable. Yet he had done something that caught the Greybeards' attention. At the siege of Old Hroldan, he had used the Thu'um to reclaim the city from the Witchmen of High Rock. This was his first time using the voice in battle, and he had done so not for personal gain, but in defense of innocence. The Greybeards recognized in this act a true need, and they sensed in Tiber something more, a destiny that would reshape the world. When Tiber climbed the 7,000 steps and presented himself at High Hrothgar, the Greybeards tested him thoroughly. They confirmed what they had suspected. He was dragonborn, possessed of a dragon soul in a mortal body. This made him the first dragonborn to appear in ages, perhaps since the fall of the Riemann dynasty centuries earlier. The Greybeards formally recognized him, bestowing upon him the title Ismir, Dragon of the North, a name that had been held by legendary figures throughout history. They prophesied that he would unite all of Tamriel under his rule, that his dynasty would endure. This recognition legitimized Tiber's subsequent conquests. When he marched south into Cyrodiil, claiming the throne of the empire, when he bent High Rock and Hammerfell to his will, when he forced even Morrowind to submit. He did so with the blessing of the Greybeards. He was not merely another warlord seeking power. He was dragonborn, chosen by the gods, sanctioned by the highest spiritual authority in Skyrim. This made his empire more than just another collection of conquered territories. It became the Third Empire, heir to the legacy of Alicia and Riemann, a political entity with divine legitimacy. After Tiber Septim's ascension, the Greybeards returned to silence. They had intervened at a moment of true need, recognizing and enabling a Dragonborn who would bring unity and peace to a fractured continent. Their purpose served, they withdrew once more to their mountain, content to watch as the empire they had helped create grew and flourished. For over 400 years, they spoke only to each other, maintaining their traditions in obscurity while the world below moved on without them. The dragon crisis of 4E201 forced them to act again. When Alduin returned from his exile outside of time, when dragons once more darkened the skies of Skyrim, the Greybeards recognized immediately that true need had arisen once more. After the Dragonborn defeated the dragon Mirmulnir and absorbed his soul, demonstrating definitively their nature, the Greybeards called out. All of Skyrim heard their summons, the word Dovahkiin echoing from the throat of the world, carried on winds that reached every corner of the province. The last Dragonborn answered that call, climbing the 7,000 steps to receive instruction. The relationship between the last Dragonborn and the Greybeards would prove complex. The Greybeards taught what they could, sharing knowledge of the Thu'um and the philosophy behind it. But they also recognized that this Dragonborn faced a threat that required combat, not contemplation. Alduin would not be defeated through meditation or moral suasion. He would need to be fought, using the very weapons of destruction that the Way of the Voice normally forbade. The Greybeards accepted this necessity, though it clearly pained them to send someone forth to use the voice in ways they had spent lifetimes arguing against. Through all these ages, through all these dramatic moments, the daily life of the Greybeards remained essentially unchanged. They woke, meditated, practiced, studied, and slept according to patterns established by Jürgen Windcaller thousands of years earlier. New members joined, old members died, but the routines continued unbroken. This consistency is itself a form of strength. In a world of chaos and constant change, the Greybeards represent stability, proof that some things can endure if properly founded and faithfully maintained. Their influence extends beyond the few times they have openly intervened. The mere fact of their existence shapes Nordic culture in subtle ways. Young Nords grow up knowing that somewhere above them, masters of immense power choose not to use that power. This knowledge creates space for values beyond raw strength, for the possibility that there might be more important things than winning battles or accumulating wealth. The Greybeards are a constant reminder that power and wisdom are not the same thing, that true mastery requires restraint. As the Fourth Era progresses into its third decade, the future of the Greybeards remains uncertain. With only 4 human members remaining, the Order is precariously close to extinction. Whether new students will come to replace them, whether the tradition will continue for another 4,000 years, these questions remain unanswered. But for now, High Hrothgar still stands. The Greybeards, Orstipede, still practice their philosophy, and the mountain still echoes with the power of those who have learned to speak without speaking. Paarthurnax, the Dragon Grandmaster above. High Hrothgar, at the very summit of the throat of the world, where the air is too thin for humans to breathe comfortably for long, dwells a being whose existence adds profound complexity to everything the Greybeards represent. Paarthurnax, whose name in the dragon tongue means ambition, overlord, cruelty, is himself a dragon. He is ancient beyond reckoning, one of the firstborn children of Akatosh, brother to Alduin the World Eater, and he is the Grandmaster of the Greybeards, the one to whom even Arngir defers, the ultimate authority on the Way of the Voice. To understand Paarthurnax's role at High Hrothgar, we must first understand what he was and what he has become. In the Merethic era, during the height of dragon dominance, Paarthurnax served as Alduin's lieutenant. He was second in command of the entire dragon hierarchy, enforcing his brother's will upon the lesser dragons, and ensuring that the mortals remained properly subjugated. By his own admission, he committed atrocities during this period, acts of cruelty and domination that are typical of dragonkind, but horrifying by mortal standards. He taught other dragons how to master the Thu'um, how to use their voices as weapons of war and terror. But at some point, something changed. Whether moved by kind's call, by recognition that Alduin's claim to godhood was false, by simple ambition to overthrow his brother, or by genuine pity for the suffering mortals, Paarthurnax betrayed the dragons. He switched sides in the dragon war, turning his knowledge and power against his own kind. He became the first dragon to teach humans the Thu'um, instructing Gurmla, Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old in the use of the voice. This act of treason against his own race made possible everything that followed: the rise of the tongues, the eventual defeat of Alduin, the freedom of humanity. After Alduin was banished through time by the Elder Scroll, Paarthurnax did not join the other dragons in hiding or in continued resistance. Instead, he withdrew to the peak of the throat of the world and began what would become a meditation lasting thousands of years. He understood that his nature as a dragon made him fundamentally dangerous. Dragons are driven by instinct to dominate, to accumulate power, to impose their will upon others. This is not a choice or a philosophy. It is what dragons are. To resist this nature requires constant, conscious effort. Paarthurnax discovered, or perhaps invented, the way of the voice as a means of controlling his draconic impulses. By focusing entirely on meditation and contemplation, by refusing to use his power except in the most extreme circumstances, by living in complete isolation, he found he could suppress the instincts that would otherwise drive him to domination. When Jurgen Windcaller climbed the mountain and began his own 7-year meditation, he encountered Paarthurnax. The dragon and the man recognized kindred spirits in each other, both seeking to understand how to wield tremendous power without being corrupted by it. The relationship that developed between Paarthurnax and the early Greybeards was complex. Paarthurnax became their teacher, but also their student. He shared with them insights into the nature of the Thu'um that no human could have discovered alone, revealing nuances of the dragon language that would otherwise have remained hidden. But he also learned from them, watching how humans approached the voice differently than dragons, seeing how creatures with finite lifespans understood power in ways that immortal beings could not. When Jurgen Windcaller established High Hrothgar, Paarthurnax became its hidden grandmaster. He remained at the summit, separated from the monastery by a final treacherous stretch of path that only the most dedicated could navigate. This separation was intentional. Paarthurnax understood that his presence could be dangerous, that seeing a dragon might inspire fear or tempt the Greybeards to view him as something to be defeated rather than learned from. Better to remain apart, available for consultation, but not constantly present. This arrangement has persisted for millennia. Most Greybeards spend their entire lives at High Hrothgar without ever meeting Paarthurnax. They know he exists, understand his role as the ultimate authority on the way of the voice, but they interact primarily with his human students. Only when truly difficult questions arise, when the Greybeards are genuinely uncertain how to proceed, do they send someone up the final path to seek the dragon's counsel. Paarthurnax's role in teaching the last Dragonborn reveals much about his character and his limitations. When the Dragonborn reached the summit, seeking knowledge of Dragonrend, Paarthurnax was genuinely helpful. He shared what he knew of Alduin's defeat, suggested using an Elder Scroll to view the past, and later aided in the actual battle against his brother. But even as he helped, he made clear his own limitations. He could not teach Dragonrend, because the shout embodies mortality, a concept that dragons fundamentally cannot grasp. He could fight alongside the Dragonborn, but his power had waned over the millennia of meditation. Where once he had been nearly Alduin's equal, now he was significantly weaker. This diminishment of power is crucial to understanding Paarthurnax's transformation. He has deliberately allowed his strength to decline, has chosen not to maintain the aggressive cultivation of power that comes naturally to dragons. This is part of his ongoing battle against his nature. Every day that he remains at the summit, meditating rather than dominating, he is choosing to be something other than what he was created to be. It is a choice he must make continuously, because the alternative is to fall back into the old patterns, to become once more the ambition overlord Cruelty, whose name he still bears. The question of whether Paarthurnax should be allowed to live became a central conflict during the Dragon Crisis. The Blades, ancient enemies of dragonkind, learned of his existence and his past. They saw him not as a reformed grandmaster, but as a war criminal, a dragon who had committed atrocities and escaped punishment only by hiding on a mountaintop. They demanded that the Dragonborn kill him, arguing that no dragon could be trusted, that his crimes required justice, that his continued existence posed an ongoing threat. Paarthurnax himself does not dispute the facts of what he did. When confronted, he acknowledges his past freely. He does not claim to have been under duress or to have been following orders. He was Alduin's lieutenant by choice, and the cruelty he inflicted was real. His defense rests not on denying his actions, but on the reality of his transformation. He poses a question to the Dragonborn that cuts to the heart of ethics and redemption. What? Is better to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? This question has no easy answer. One could argue that someone who was never tempted to evil is morally superior to someone who struggles against wicked impulses. Or one could argue that the struggle itself has value, that choosing goodness despite one's nature is more praiseworthy than simply being good without effort. Paarthurnax represents the latter position, but he acknowledges that others might reasonably disagree. The Greybeards are unequivocal in their support of Paarthurnax. To them, he is living proof that the way of the voice works, that even the most fundamentally domineering and cruel being can be transformed through meditation and discipline. If Paarthurnax can control his draconic nature, then surely any human can control their baser impulses. His existence validates their entire philosophy. More practically, he is their teacher, the source of much of their knowledge about the Thu'um. Without him, crucial understanding would be lost. The decision of whether to kill Paarthurnax ultimately rests with the Dragonborn, and the game allows players to choose either path. But the existence of the choice itself is meaningful. It forces consideration of questions that have no simple answers. Can evil acts be balanced by subsequent good works? Does transformation erase culpability for past crimes? Is redemption possible for those whose very nature inclines them toward wickedness? These are not questions that can be resolved through appeals to abstract principle. They require judgment, wisdom, and a willingness to accept that some dilemmas have no perfect solution. If Paarthurnax survives, he takes on a new mission after Alduin's defeat. Other dragons, resurrected by Alduin's return, now find themselves leaderless and confused. They were created to dominate, but their master is dead, and the world has moved on. Paarthurnax seeks to teach them the way of the voice, to show them that they too can overcome their nature through discipline and meditation. It is an ambitious project, perhaps doomed to failure. Most dragons will not willingly surrender their power and pride, but even the attempt speaks to Paarthurnax's transformation, that he would dedicate himself to redeeming his entire species. From his perch at the summit of the throat of the world, Paarthurnax has watched the entire history of the First, Second, Third, and Fourth eras unfold. He saw the rise and fall of the First Empire of the Nords, watched as they conquered and then lost their territories. He observed the Riemann dynasty, the interregnum, the rise of Tiber Septim's empire. He witnessed the Oblivion Crisis and the collapse of the Third Empire. Through all these momentous events, he remained at his post, unchanging, constant, a fixed point around which history pivoted. His perspective, born of millennia of observation and meditation, offers insights that no mortal could achieve. He understands the cyclical nature of empire and conquest, has seen the same patterns repeat across the ages. He knows that most of what seems vitally important in any given moment is ephemeral, that dynasties and political arrangements are temporary, while the deeper currents of existence flow on unchanged. This knowledge makes him simultaneously the wisest of counselors and the most frustrating, for he sees things in scales of time that make mortal concerns seem trivial. Yet despite this vast perspective, Paarthurnax has not become detached from concern for the world. He helped defeat Alduin because he recognized that the World Eater's return represented a genuine threat to existence itself. He aids the Dragonborn because he sees in them the potential to make meaningful change. He takes on the task of teaching other dragons because he believes transformation is possible even for those whose nature seems fixed. In all of this, he demonstrates that wisdom and engagement are not incompatible. That one can see the bigger picture while still caring about the details. Paarthurnax represents both the possibility and the difficulty of redemption. His very existence poses challenges to simple moral frameworks. Can the perpetrator of atrocities be redeemed? Can good acts in the present balance evil acts in the past? These questions echo beyond the fictional world of Skyrim, touching on real issues of justice, forgiveness, and the capacity for human, or in this case, dragon, transformation. That they are raised by a video game character speaks to the depth that can be achieved even in popular entertainment when creators are willing to engage with genuine moral complexity. The dragon at the peak of the world remains one of the most compelling figures in High Hrothgar's long history. He is proof that the way of the voice can transform even the most unlikely students, and reminder that some questions of right and wrong resist easy answers. As long as he endures, the summit of the throat of the world will house not just a monastery, but a living parable about the possibility of change. The return of the Dragonborn. For over 2 centuries, High Hrothgar had maintained its traditional silence. The last time the Greybeards had openly intervened in world affairs was during Tiber Septim's rise to power in the Second Era. Since then, they had retreated into their mountain fastness, practicing their philosophy while empires rose and fell in the world below. The Septim dynasty had ended with the Oblivion Crisis. The Fourth Era had begun with chaos and civil war. Skyrim had endured invasion, occupation, and internal strife. Through all of this, the Greybeards watched but did not act. The times, however difficult, did not constitute true need. That changed on a cold afternoon in 4E201. The Dragonborn, who at this point knew nothing of their nature or destiny, stood on the western watchtower near Whiterun, having just helped defend the city from a dragon attack. The dragon, Mirmulnir, lay dead at their feet, and then something unexpected happened. The dragon's body began to burn with ethereal fire, not consuming the flesh, but dissolving it into streams of light that flowed into the Dragonborn's body. With those streams came understanding, knowledge of words and power that had been locked in the dragon's soul. The Dragonborn spoke a word of power without fully understanding what they were doing. The Thu'um erupted from their throat, a shockwave of force that knocked nearby guards from their feet. Those who witnessed it understood immediately what had happened. This person was Dragonborn, Dovahkiin, possessed of a dragon's soul in a mortal body. The gift that had been absent from the world since the fall of the Septim dynasty had returned. High above, on the throat of the world, the Greybeards felt that moment of recognition. They discussed among themselves what this meant and what they should do. A dragonborn had appeared at the same time as dragons returned to Skyrim. This was no coincidence. The pattern was clear. Evil had risen, and the gods had sent their champion to oppose it. This was true need, the clearest example they had encountered in centuries. The Greybeards must act. And so, for the first time in over 200 years, they spoke. All 4 human Greybeards, joined by Paarthurnax at the summit, shouted a single word into the world: Dovahkiin. The sound rolled across Skyrim like thunder, audible in every hold, unmistakable in its meaning. The Greybeards were summoning someone. The entire province heard it, from farmers in their fields to jarls in their palaces. Everyone understood that something momentous had just occurred. For the Dragonborn, the summons was impossible to ignore. They felt it not just as sound, but as a pull, a compulsion to ascend the mountain and present themselves to these masters. Jarl Balgruuf, the ruler of Whiterun, confirmed what had happened and urged the Dragonborn to make the pilgrimage. The Greybeards do not summon lightly, he explained. If they called for you, it is your duty to answer. Thus began a journey that countless pilgrims had made before, but which would have consequences far beyond any ordinary visit. The Dragonborn left Whiterun and made their way to Ivarstead, found the start of the 7,000 steps, and began to climb. They read the tablets, fought off the frost-trolled and ice wraiths, endured the cold and the wind. They arrived at High Hrothgar's doors exhausted, uncertain what awaited them within, knowing only that they had been called. When the doors opened, they were met by Arngeir, the only Greybeard who could safely speak to them. The greeting was formal but not unfriendly. "Welcome, Dragonborn. We have been waiting for you." Arngeir explained that the other Greybeards had sensed the Dragonborn's use of the voice at the Western Watchtower, that this had confirmed suspicions raised when the Thu'um was used for the first time at Helgen during the dragon attack there. But before they could formally acknowledge what the Dragonborn was, they needed to see proof. The test was simple. Demonstrate the voice. Shout. Use the power that supposedly dwelt within you and show that you truly are what you claim to be. The Dragonborn complied, using the Fus Force shout they had learned from absorbing Mirmulnir's soul. The word echoed through the hall, and the Greybeards nodded in satisfaction. Yes, this one was truly Dovahkiin. What followed was a series of lessons unlike any the Dragonborn had received before. Arngeir explained the way of the voice, the philosophy that governed the Greybeards' lives. He taught that the Thu'um was a gift from Kine, that it should be used only in times of true need, that its real purpose was worship rather than warfare. He made clear that the Dragonborn, while possessing natural talent that would take others decades to achieve, still needed to understand the deeper meaning of the power they wielded. The first formal lesson was in the word ro, balance, the second word of the unrelenting force shout. Brother Einarth spoke it to a word wall in the courtyard, allowing the Dragonborn to absorb its meaning directly. Then came the test. Strike 3 ethereal targets with the enhanced shout. The Dragonborn succeeded, demonstrating that they could not only learn words quickly, but apply them effectively. The next lesson was more complex. Brother Bori led the Dragonborn outside to the courtyard and taught them Wold Whirlwind, the first word of the Whirlwind Sprint shout. This word allows the user to move with incredible speed, almost seeming to teleport short distances. But learning the word was only the first step. The Dragonborn then had to use it to reach a specific spot in the courtyard within a time limit. This tested not just knowledge, but timing and control, skills that would prove essential in the trials ahead. Having passed these initial tests, the Greybeards gave the Dragonborn their final trial before formal recognition. They must retrieve an artifact from a dangerous location, the horn of Jürgen Windcaller from his tomb in Ustengrav. This quest served multiple purposes. It tested the Dragonborn's courage and capability in a real combat situation. It required them to undertake a pilgrimage of sorts, visiting the resting place of the man who founded the Greybeards' order. And it gave them time away from High Hrothgar to contemplate what they had learned. The journey to Ustengrav and through its trap-filled depths was harrowing. Bandits, warlocks, and draugr infested the barrow. Ancient mechanisms designed to kill intruders still functioned after thousands of years. When the Dragonborn finally reached Jürgen Windcaller's sarcophagus, they found that the horn was not there. Instead, a note waited, written by someone who called themselves a friend, and requested a meeting at the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood. This led to an encounter with Delphine, a member of the Blades who had been searching for the Dragonborn. She had taken the horn to ensure she could make contact, to bring the Dragonborn into the Blades' agenda, rather than leaving them under the Greybeards' influence. This moment represented the beginning of a conflict that would eventually force the Dragonborn to choose between two competing visions of what it meant to be Dovahkiin. But first, there was the matter of returning to High Hrothgar. Delphine gave the Dragonborn the horn, and they climbed the 7,000 steps once more. Arngeir was not pleased to learn about the Blades' involvement, but he accepted the horn and prepared for the formal ceremony that would follow. What happened next was one of the most dramatic moments in High Hrothgar's long history. The four Greybeards took their positions around the Dragonborn in the main hall. Then, for the first time in over 2 centuries, they spoke words meant to be heard by others. They spoke in the dragon tongue, their combined voices shaking the monastery to its foundations, causing avalanches on the mountain slopes, sending tremors through the earth that could be felt in Ivarstead far below. They spoke the ancient words of recognition, bestowing upon the Dragonborn the title of Ysmir, Dragon of the North. This was the same title given to Tiber Septim, to Wulfharth, Ash King, to the greatest heroes in Nordic history. It marked the Dragonborn as someone chosen by the gods, blessed by Kine, destined to stand against great evil. The blessing was both an honor and a burden, acknowledging not just power, but responsibility. After this ceremony, the nature of the Dragonborn's relationship with the Greybeards changed. They were no longer student and teacher, but something more like equals. Arngeir offered to teach the Dragonborn the locations of word walls throughout Skyrim, places where ancient words of power had been carved in stone, waiting for someone with the gift to absorb them. This was knowledge the Greybeards rarely shared, but they recognized that the Dragonborn would need all the power they could gather for what was coming. The Dragonborn's subsequent journey would take them far from High Hrothgar. They would learn about Alduin's return, about the prophecy of the World Eater, about the ancient heroes who had banished him using an Elder Scroll. They would be forced to work with the Blades despite the Greybeards' disapproval. They would delve into Dwemer ruins, negotiate with Daedric princes, and eventually travel to realms beyond mortal understanding. But they returned to High Hrothgar at crucial moments. When they needed to learn about Dragonrend, Arngeir reluctantly directed them to Paarthurnax at the summit. When they required a safe place to negotiate peace between the Empire and Stormcloaks, High Hrothgar's neutral ground made it possible. When they needed guidance or simply a moment of peace amid the chaos of their destiny, the monastery provided sanctuary. The Greybeards' role in the Dragon Crisis revealed both the strengths and limitations of their philosophy. They provided essential teaching and support to the Dragonborn. They offered wisdom born. Born of millennia of study, they connected the Dragonborn to Paarthurnax, whose knowledge proved crucial, but they could not fight the dragons themselves. When Alduin attacked the throat of the world, only Paarthurnax and the Dragonborn stood against him. The Greybeards remained within High Hrothgar, maintaining their principle of nonviolence even in the face of world-ending threat. This restraint frustrated some. Here were beings of immense power, and they chose to sit out the most important conflict in centuries. But from the Greybeards' perspective, they were doing exactly what they should. They had identified the Dragonborn, taught them what they needed to know, and provided support. The actual fighting was not their role. That was what Dragonborn existed for, to stand as champions against great evils. The Greybeards' contribution was to ensure that this Dragonborn was properly prepared for that role. In the aftermath of Alduin's defeat, when the last Dragonborn returned from Sovngarde having ended the threat of the World Eater forever, the Greybeards offered their congratulations and counsel. They spoke of the continuing duty that would face the Dragonborn, the need to remain vigilant, the understanding that one great evil's defeat does not mean the end of all threats. But they also acknowledged that this particular true need had been met, that the crisis that prompted them to break their silence was resolved. The relationship between the last Dragonborn and High Hrothgar remains complex. If the Dragonborn sides with the Blades and kills Paarthurnax, the Greybeards become hostile, refusing further assistance or teaching. They see this act as a betrayal of everything they stand for, proof that the Dragonborn did not truly understand the lessons they were taught. But if Paarthurnax survives, if the Dragonborn refuses the Blades' demand for vengeance, the Greybeards remain allies available for counsel and support. The return of the Dragonborn and the Dragon Crisis represent the most significant events in High Hrothgar's history since Tiber Septim. They demonstrate that the Greybeards' patient vigil has purpose, that their refusal to act in lesser matters preserves their ability to act when true need arises. They also reveal the eternal tension between the way of the voice and the pragmatic necessities of defending the world against evil, a tension that no philosophy can fully resolve. And so the story brings us full circle, back to that monastery of gray stone perched upon the highest peak in Tamriel. High Hrothgar endures as it has endured for over 4,000 years, home to those who have learned that true power lies not in domination, but in restraint, not in shouting, but in silence. The Greybeards remain at their post, maintaining traditions that stretch back to the First Era, practicing a philosophy that seems out of place in a world that values action over contemplation. But perhaps that is exactly why they are needed. In an age of constant conflict, of civil war and dragon attacks and threats both mundane and apocalyptic, someone must remember that not every problem can be solved by force, that wisdom sometimes means knowing when not to act. High Hrothgar stands as a monument to discipline and dedication, to the idea that mastery of self is more important than mastery of others, that the greatest strength is the strength to refrain. Whether one agrees with the Greybeards' philosophy or not, one cannot deny the purity of their commitment to it. They have walked this path for millennia, have proven through their endurance that there is power in patience, might in meditation. From the frozen peak of the throat of the world, the Greybeards continue their watch. They study the Thu'um, honor the gods, and wait for the next moment of true need. They know it will come eventually. Evil does not disappear, and champions will be needed again. When that time arrives, when another crisis threatens all of Tamriel, the Greybeards will be ready. Their voices, which have remained silent for so long, will speak once more, and the world will shake at their words. This is the lore of High Hrothgar. A place where breath becomes power, where silence speaks louder than shouts, where the path to mastery leads not upward toward pride, but inward toward understanding. It is a place of contradictions resolved through discipline, of impossible philosophy made real through dedication, of a way of life so demanding that few can follow it, yet so profound that its influence shapes an entire culture. The mountain endures. The monastery stands. The Greybeards keep their vigil. And somewhere in the wind that constantly sweeps across those ancient stones, one can still hear the echo of Kind's first breath, the voice that spoke mankind into being, and that lives on in those who have learned to speak with silence. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the lore of High Hrothgar.